welcome to a live read with an author, that's me. And this is where I read my own work. My name is Rory. If you've never been on the channel before, this is Varietal Literature. Varietal Literature is a group of writers from Vancouver who like to put up their own stories, as we're going to do tonight. Or sometimes we just like to write stuff live. That's what we do in Varietal Show. And sometimes we read old fairy tales, which we already did on Tuesday, which you can check out if you want. But what we're doing today is I'm going to read the fourth part and final part of my novella called The Deadwood Reaches, which is a story about tree people. I will give you a little bit of a summary in a moment, because it's been a little while since we did part 3 and even longer since 2 and 1. But I'm just going to open with two things for you if you've just sort of stepped into the chat and you're trying to figure out what's going on. If you are not watching this live, down in the description there will be a timestamp to jump to the reading and then jump to the questions if, you know, there's something you would prefer to watch and want to skip the intro or whatever else. There'll be timestamps, very useful for you to just go where you want to go. The second thing I will say is that the final part here, the finale, has a bit of a content warning. There's two things that I think could be triggering, so you'll have to decide for yourself. In the vaguest terms possible, it deals with suicide, and it deals with residential schooling in a much more distant way, but it's there. So if those are things that obviously can be traumatic for people, it's probably not for you. I apologize for that, but thank you for dropping by. For the rest who are going to stick around despite those themes, let me give you a little summary. Although let me say, if you have not watched or read part 1, 2, 3, or, well, 1, 2, 3, this is 4, you really do need to do that. The story is interconnected. It's not really the kind you can drop into. As far as our structure, I'm going to read for about 10 or 15 minutes. It's not that long of an ending. And then if there are any questions, I'll answer any questions. I might share a little bit of my insights for my own writing on it, just in case some people are interested in that. Obviously, it's not everybody, but we'll do that after, so you can choose to stick around if you want. GS loved the music on the intro window. Yeah, I found that fairly recently, and I really enjoyed it as well. It's Cloud City or something by Andre, forgetting the last name. If you are the type of person who prefers to read too, all of this stuff is available to read on our website, varietal-literature.ca, which you can see a link to this particular part down below in the description. And GS also says good evening and hello and good evening to you, GS. So I won't fluff about too much, but I'm going to take about 2 minutes here just to remind you of what's happened in the story so far. The Deadwood Reaches opened with, in the first part, our protagonist, who I believe I never named. I don't think that was very intentional. I just thought about it. If he has a name, I've forgotten it. I don't think I named him. But anyways, he went hunting with his brother and a hunting guide in this small little town, mountain town. And the hunting guide mentioned that there was a strange occurrence in that town specifically, where a group of people who are trees in the winter, rooted, look like normal trees, turn into people in spring, come and live as people and look like people among the people in summer and into fall, and then go back to their grove and turn to trees. In the second part, which takes place about 10 years later, our protagonist is driving through town, stops in, because it's a story that was always sort of a curiosity to him, and it's during summer months, whereas he went in winter months in the first. During that, he has a discussion with that guide who he meets in a restaurant again. He meets his wife, who he suspects is a tree person, and challenges him as such when he comes back that night. The important thing is, though, he witnesses in the shadows of a night in the middle of the street when he's leaving the pub that day, what he believes to be an axe murder. Everyone kind of hustles him off and says, like, you know, we'll get the cops will phone if they need to, go away. He never gets a call, so he comes back. And he challenges the guy, his hunting guide, says, I think your wife is this. And he goes back to town and sees that the big log cabin has been destroyed. And then he turns back to go to the hunting guide's house again, and the big greenhouse has been crushed. He sees a big green eye in the forest. Something has seriously, well, the glass has seriously injured the guy, and so he drags him into his car. He's drunk, tries to drive him to a hospital, and where we're going to pick up is right after that. So he had dragged the hunting guide with the wife that he thinks is a tree person, who had a smashed greenhouse and got cut up by the plate glass, into the back of his car and started driving away, and we will pick up in with that. Hopefully that's a good enough summary. So this is The Deadwood Reaches Part 4 by myself, Rory. And this is, I'm reading it from our website, so, you know, if you're so inclined, you can read along. The broken wind chime. I woke up against my steering wheel. When I sat up, the airbag peeled off my face. My mouth was dry and tasted like nails. A tooth was loose, and my neck twitched when I turned it to my left. Rain washed the remains of my windshield off the dash. A telephone pole was growing out of my hood. It was dim, damp, and early morning. A single street light noticed the morning light and turned itself off. I ached inside and out, but nothing seemed broken or serious. Hell, I may have passed out before I even hit the pole. The back seat was empty. There were bloodstains on the leather, but Amon wasn't there. My car was wrecked. My phone was out of reception. My muscles spasmed. I threw up, then sat in the gravel and just let the rain wash it into a grassy ditch. I think it was about then I realized I'd lost my fucking job and derailed myself into a madhouse town I didn't understand. I remembered having this thought that if I went walking for help, I'd just end up paying bills to get back to my suite, where there would be no one but myself. So I got up and went back to Amon's instead. He wasn't there, but I had to check. I threw water bottles from his trailer into one of his backpacks and started to hike out past where we were the night before. There was no finished trail through the woods from Amon's place, but there was a rain-slicked game trail pressed with boot prints. I figured they were his, so I slipped my way up through the underbrush for the next few hours. Every crest of that trail looked like the peak, an ending to the trudge, but then a higher ledge would grow up behind it. Every muscle around my spine was seizing by the second switchback. The last of my drunk drained out into the rain, leaving me half blind with a migraine. And I pressed on into the gray morning rain. It took a long time, but I finally found where the Willows canopy draped over the last high ridge. I was coming up behind it this time, rather than from the valley below like I had twice before. Coming from behind meant the last half hour was a scramble over some slick rubble. The willow was enormous. It sat on a throne of stone like it ruled over the whole dead volcano valley. The valley, which had been turned soil and petals not 3 days ago, was now filled with a low forest of twisted trees. They looked like they had when I first saw them, except now they had some greenery and buds. I climbed down and searched through the strange forest for Amon. The soil near the trees' roots was recently turned, but even more recently smoothed by the downpour. The whole valley was quiet, even with the rain. The moss slowed every echo and buried most sounds. Then I saw Amon. Honestly, I knew what it was going to be before I saw him, but it still caught me. He was under a tall tree with green buds on arms that reached toward the great willow. Not the sky. Hanging by a rope, strung to one of its arms. I took a few steps closer, but only a few. The wind twisted his stiff, blue body around like a broken wind chime. I wondered if she knew. I hoped she didn't, but I wondered. I looked back up to the willow for a moment and left it all to return to the city. My brother was the only person I could call who would likely pick me up that far away. He thought it was a bad joke when I asked him. It was hours away, so I ate a bit in a diner and nodded off. The locals muttering about the ruined saloon worked their way into my dreams, and Mercy let my brother cut them short with a nudge when he arrived. Once we were in the car, he asked why I was out there. Work. But I screwed up my presentation. I'm fairly certain I lost my job. Got a bit too liquored up on the drive back, so I stopped in to find a motel. I said, "Why do you look like you've been in a shipwreck, man?" he asked. I took the wrong exit, was way off from the city, so once my car was totaled, I had no choice but to hike up to the city from a ways east. And I got lost, I said. He laughed, then turned the radio on at a low volume. I waited a bit with my thoughts, then asked my brother if he could answer something for me. He nodded, so I asked, "You ever really been destroyed by something?" Is this a jab about the gun again? Is Ridge City gonna bring this shit back into my life? 10 years, you think you'd find a new joke? He huffed, picking at his teeth in the rearview mirror. I'm being serious. I mean, like, emotionally or something. You ever been really devastated emotionally or whatever? I asked, turning up the Toyota's heat to stave off the shiver I had had since my hike. He thought about the question until it soured up his face. Then he said, "I was pretty scared when Josie got pneumonia. She had that really high fever and it made her so out of it I thought she was dying the whole way to the hospital. I remember saying, 'I refuse to get remarried, so you better make it.' I guess I thought maybe if she laughed, that meant she was okay. I mean, she didn't laugh, but, you know, she's okay anyway." He shrugged. "Is that sort of what you mean?" I wondered if that was what I meant. Yeah, I guess. But when I think devastated, I mean like losing everything you are. I'll give you an example. I saw a documentary on one of the last residential schools in the country, you know, where they beat the Indian out of the kids and all that sick shit, I said. My brother shrugged but nodded, then merged over a lane. Well, anyway, they were technically adults now, but they were still kind of basically kids. You know what I mean? Like they were devastated on some deeper level. Like just anything they were or could be was so specifically torn out of them. Anyway, they had this look like I'd never seen before, this broken gaze. Man, that's dark. I guess the answer is no, I've never been residential school devastated. Why are you bringing up all this dark shit anyways? He asked, shaking his head. I think the hike gave me lots of hours to think about misery, I lied. But I had a thought when I saw the documentary and something reminded me of it. I thought that's exactly because they valued something specific, culture or family or home or whatever. That's what made them so devastated. Not because they were kids being abused. I don't think it's anything more, existential than that. He shoulder checked and changed lanes again. Yeah, fair point, I relented. There was a long stretch of road where we sat with the soft hum of the radio before my brother broke back in to ask, "Are you saying that they got destroyed because they valued things? Like you're immune to devastation if you have nothing to wish for?" I mean, I think I'm saying that you can't be devastated if you don't value anything. So yeah, I guess. I said toward the passenger window. Okay, but if you don't value anything, why would you live? It's a lot of struggle if there's nothing in it for you. Maybe you're immune because you barely exist the way the living do, my brother offered. Yeah, like trying to punch a ghost, I added. My brother found that funny, then noticed I wasn't laughing. Christ. I don't know why we're talking about this. How do you always rope me into this dark shit? I mean, Jesus, are you all right? Do I need to worry about you? He looked over. Yeah, I'm tired, but I'm fine. I'll be glad to be home. For a few weeks, I refreshed the Ridge City website when I wasn't emailing resumes, and I wanted to see some reference to any of it. Nothing came up, but I still checked a few times a month after that. I've never seen a solitary word written about any of it. The closest was a listing for Amon's property near the end of the year, but the bank was selling it. I guess all I really know, all I can tell you, is there was a valley in the North Mountains where the people grew like trees, but maybe there wasn't. Because it's a forest now full of still trees like you'd find anywhere else. But a decent guy died there, someone I kinda knew. And as far as I can tell, no one has ever cared about that but me. And there we go. That is the end of my novella, The Deadwood Reaches. I realize, especially reading it aloud, it's really apparent to me how dark it is, but if you enjoyed any of these or the stories that I've written, you can go to the website and drop me some change on my Buy Rory a Coffee if you so desire. You don't have to do that, but it is, I do appreciate people who are able to do that, of course. Mostly though, I just hope you guys enjoyed the story. I do want to mention it was edited by Lindsay Vermillion, and if you want to check out her website, you can click on her hot link on our page there, which I will do now to show you. Before we go to our questions, this is Lindsay's very lovely website. So, if you guys have any questions, you can drop them in the live chat. Otherwise, I'm just going to say a little bit about the story, and a little bit about my philosophy on themes, because I think that's important. Gia says that was beautiful, Rory. Thank you. Just to clarify something before I give you sort of how I look at the story. So I'm of the belief that writer's intention does not determine the meaning of a story. I think that in a lot of ways when I write stories, they, and I'm trying to say this in the least pretentious way possible because it is very honestly how it goes, they sort of reveal themselves back. And when I say they reveal themselves back, they tell me things about myself, because I'm the one writing it. But they also tell me a little bit about just the environment that I'm marinating in, like things that slip in. So one thing I'll say up front is there was no real plan on themes going into the story. I was fascinated by the idea of trees turning seasonally into people and back into trees. And I didn't know why that thought was fascinating to me. I came up with it sitting in an office staring at a tree. And so I just sort of wrote from that point. I'd written this while I was in the writer's studio, so it's a few years ago now. And I just started writing out from that. It was meant to be actually a much shorter story. The first part was really meant to be kind of the whole thing, I think. I think I was just going to do it as like he shares lore and that's about it. It was just sort of people sharing stories on a hunting trip. And I kind of got fixated on it, and I found more into it. So in terms of my own influences on it, the character is a sort of almost satirical, caricatured version of me in my 20s. Like I wasn't driving around drunk and stuff like that, but I did drink quite a bit. I don't drink anymore. So there's aspects of that. And I think the tone, atmosphere, the town that I'm in and stuff came from the fact that I used to fly around BC teaching construction safety to various places. And I think part of the fact that I got exposed to these pretty isolated little towns where it costs as much to fly there as it does to Hawaii, so like nobody ever goes there, was how often they were adjacent to reservations, like the Haida Gwaii and whatever else in BC. And very often those were the people who had asked me to come out and teach because I gave accreditations that could be used for certain workplaces that were in the area. And I really, as much as like going to Prince George in the winter was a bit of a nightmare on its own on one level, I actually really enjoyed teaching those classes, and they were really impactful. I had so many wonderful so many wonderful people that I'll never really see again, unfortunately, but that were just tremendously kind and insightful and earnest and passionate and so on. And I guess what I'm trying to get at is there was no specific plan on what the theme was going to be, but I can see how my brain associating small towns to my experience of going around small towns in BC, to remembering, you know, what Canada's built on top of. And that just sort of, you know, that's the web of creativity. Eventually those themes found their way out. Now, if you asked me when I wrote it what I thought the themes were, I would say that it was about the contrast in senses of tragedy. And I think that that is most clearly defined. It's very like subtle throughout, but I think it's most clearly defined in that final conversation with his brother. I think what I was trying to get across there is his brother's not malicious. His brother isn't an unkind person. He's not even particularly intentionally self-centered. I mean, he drives all the way out just to pick his brother up. Doesn't tell him to like get a bus or something, right? But his brother doesn't have any kind of context for what kind of tragedy that the protagonist has most recently been exposed to. And I think the idea was that the protagonist was his brother, even if he sort of saw himself as separate. And then he witnesses basically the death of a species, in a way, of a civilization, for unclear but obviously dark reasons. And it really hangs on him. And I think that what I was trying to get across in that final conversation then is the idea that in seeing that, he recognized the gap in his sense of tragedy a little clearer. Not that he now understood what it was to lose what he'd seen people lose, but he understood at least how far the gap was. Whereas his brother, he now recognizes himself kind of in it. And I think that was sort of what I was trying to get across in that conversation. He wants his brother to understand it by words alone, and words aren't going to do it. And so he just sort of starts to relent. And so that very last paragraph, which was something I added kind of at the after I kind of like ended it a few times. Like I ended it in the forest with the hanging, and then I ended it. I added this conversation because I was like, I feel like there's more theme here. And then I ended it again. And that closing line is the thing I'm probably happiest about in this whole story. So I'll repeat it because I just went by it, because I feel like it summarizes the character growth and moment that I really wanted to capture. Which is, it's kind of two sentences, but there really should be one. I guess all I can tell you is there was a valley in the North Mountains where people grew like trees, but maybe there wasn't, because it's a forest now full of still trees like you'd find anywhere else. But a decent guy died there, someone I kind of knew. As far as I can tell, no one has ever cared about that but me. That last line, no one has ever cared about that but me, is not meant to be taken literally. It's meant to describe a feeling. To be alone with a sense of tragedy that most people cannot grasp is what I wanted him to be with in the end. To understand that like there is this kind of existential loneliness, to know a good thing was there, to know it was unjustly gone, and that nobody could ever really understand it. You can't communicate it. It's not something he could get across to his brother in words and stuff. And so like, I won't talk any longer. I know some people, I will say actually, I'm not the kind of person that wants to know all the writer's thoughts, but I think that's because I'm a writer and I feel pretty comfortable interpreting writing for myself because I know what it's like to make it. But I do notice that a lot of readers do want to know a little bit about thinking process and stuff. So there's some of the influences and thinking process on the theme. I think the last thing I'll say is that in reading it back now, I would I would say that the more prevalent theme is just the notion of, see, this is the problem. I wrote the story because that's how it was articulated. It's hard to articulate a second way. There is the notion of vulnerability, that in order to enjoy your life, you have to connect to life. But when you do that, you make yourself vulnerable. And I feel like that last conversation, that was probably more obvious. It wasn't obvious to me when I wrote it, but when I read it back, it made more sense. The point he's making is that a lot of people who can't understand tragedies that have occurred to other people or are kind of cold to it is because they just sort of live in a numb and nihilistic state where they guard themselves against any kind of relationships. And our protagonist realizes they kind of accidentally got attached to something despite clearly being avoidant of that, and that put them in a place of, well, devastation, a small taste of it. GS says, lol, Big Drew. Hi, Big Drew. I'm late. That's okay that you're late. We're not doing any live writing. I'm just was reading my piece, and then I was blabbing for like, holy crap, like 10 minutes about it, because sometimes people are interested in that. I won't say much more. I don't see any questions in the chat. I mean, if you want to ask some questions about the story, go right ahead. I'm happy to answer them. But I'm not sure it's a story that invites a lot of questions, to be honest. But Big Drew says, hi Rory, hi GS, hi aforementioned protagonist, hi other participants, hi spam posters. Well, hi Drew. It is good to see you here. GS said those last lines really hit home. Yeah, for me too, when I wrote them. I feel like there's no way to talk about art without sounding like just a stuck-up prick. But I don't know if it ever is quite clear how much writing is a process of discovering things at the same time as you're writing it. Like, I think there's a sense of a lot more structure and whatever else, but like lines like that, they happen to you as you write them. It wasn't really like, I want to get this line in. It just sort of happened. And I was like, yes, that's the end of the story. He learned something, not necessarily enough, but he learned something about the roots of the world, I guess. And maybe that would make him grow up a bit. Okay, so that's enough. Probably blabbity blab for me. If anybody wants to ask a question or anything, you ask away. I'm just going to talk a little bit about where you can find us and what kind of things you can find. Also, if you came in late and you want to hear the story yourself, this video will be on demand. You can restart. You can restart it now, by the way, if you just drag the slider back. You can do that while live. It might cut you off when we end, but then you can just restart. The other thing that I'll add is we, this month, are going to do a couple of things. We are going to put up an essay on copyright. I'm almost done it, and then I got to run it through a friend of mine who's really helping me, doing some reads and doing some editing. I suspect it will be my goal is April, so I expect this will all happen near the end of April. The other thing we're going to do is we are going to be doing an episodic, at least one season that has a bit of a cliffhanger ending. We'll see how people respond to it, whether it's worth it for me to do another season of episodic short stories that are interconnected about siblings trying to, save the world from imminent disaster, but it is written in a mishmash of this kind of writing and my love of fairy tale writing. So it's sort of that mixture of mythology, love, and whatever else. It's sort of pre-Tolkien world building. I'm having a lot of fun writing it. I do always wonder if anybody's going to understand what I'm doing. But when that comes along, we may do some more live reads of it so that people have a chance to hear me read it. But if you want to read stories too, you can go to our website. Spencer says, huge process of discovery. So Spencer Lucas Oakes is one of Varietal's writers. He's been on the stream before. Spencer is a wonderful writer of his own. And Spencer, if there's a place where anybody can see your writing, you should post it up. I think you might be on the website. It would have been last year, and now I don't remember. So before I talk, let me click on stories. I'll show you. See, we're on the Varietals website here. There's Avalon's Hunting Party. There's a nonfiction Choose Your Own Adventure by Felix Wong. There's a Choose Your Own Adventure by me called The Battle for Black Friday, which is a somewhat absurd thing. There's my Horror House Choose Your Own Adventure. That's a horror story, an odd place for a gallery. I really enjoyed that. There's Deadwood. Reaches part 1, 2, 3, and 4. There's Dana's Burn Your House Down to Save It from the Fire. Avalon Born, version of her, another story. Diane, favorite notebook. There's another story for me, Sands of Tanari. I've read that one too. You can find it in the live read web list. It's a science fiction story based around the notion of a certain type of lung disease. Erica is I just went to a poetry reading of Erica's on Sunday. There was nothing festive about the fair at the Peony in 1492. Felix, Chinese funerals are weird. Avalon Born, The Other Woman. Dana Mahana, The Girth's Girl Jane. And there's easily my most popular story, Fission. But yeah, Spencer, unfortunately, I guess I just overlooked it. We never put your story up. You should give us a story. Anyways, Big Drew says, Rory, do you know that I'm a writer too? I did not. What kind of writing do you do? I knew that you did music. You've mentioned that before. Is that what you mean? Spencer says, huge process of discovery for me. I always say it's like connecting dots. The dots are the rough idea. Yeah, I call it waypoints. Same idea, though. I have these waypoints in mind. Places I want to hit, things I want to do. But I don't really know what the road in between looks like until I write it. GS says, Amon knew his wife was a tree person. Yes, he did. Yeah. If you're curious about world building stuff, it's never established in the story because it didn't seem... Well, it is established in the story, but not directly. Yeah. Amon, they knew who was tree people. People in the town. The, Big Drew says, I have a hard time following irregular conversations, let alone stories. Well, that's okay. I mean, there's different styles of stories for different people. I mean, some stories, this is more literary style. Literary not in terms of its status, but in how it's written, which is a bit kind of like wordy and subtle and metaphoric. And like, it's a little, a little more artsy fartsy, right? There's lots of writing though that is a lot easier to follow along with, does a lot more to remind you where the story's going and so on. GS says, mine is more poetry and lyric writing, but I am. Holly's house seems to like me writing. Yeah, that's good. I'm not so good at poetry. I've done some poetry. I wouldn't say any of them are great. It's kind of the way that I journal emotions. GS, as a non-writer, I always assumed writers had an entire plot laid out ahead of time, including the ending. Okay, so here's the great lie of writers. I see them do this all the time, famous writers, because they want to see you seem like some genius that's in control. No writer does that I've ever met. The ones who say they plot out and plan things, I've seen what their plans are. They're pretty vague. They don't do that because that's not how creativity is. Creativity is a lot more instinctual than associative. What they're doing is they're lying and making other people feel dumb, to be honest, and that's why it kind of bugs me. Writing is a lot more a process of like beating your head against an idea, not really knowing why, but just doing it over and over and over again over like 7 drafts. My favorite quote, which I've definitely said on the channel before in this regard, is Neil Gaiman, who said the second draft is where you pretend what happened in the first draft was what you intended all along. And I think that's very true. There's really only a few stories that I've written that came out pretty much how you see them first draft, and I did very little with them. And one of them is Fission, which I think I've read on here, but I don't remember if I'm honest. Big Drew says the following along comment was a joke. Well, I mean, that's okay if it isn't, though. If that's not the case for you, I just certainly know people who have a hard time following stories. I will say that, like, the notion that to be smart is what you need, like, you need to be smart to write is not terribly true in my experience. It's a lot more important that you are emotionally honest. Art is an emotional thing. So, yeah, intelligence might help you find some words, but ultimately your ability to find emotions in yourself feel them honestly and then try to put them on the page is really what people attract to, whether they know it or not. So I wouldn't say that big brain plot everything out is really crucial to being a great writer. It's a lot more about sort of emotional awareness, I think. Okay, well, I don't want to take everyone's time up too much. If there are no other questions, what I can say is thank you to everybody who dropped by for the live read. If you missed it, of course, down in the description, I do have the videos part 1, 2, and 3. You can go back and watch all of them read, or if you just want to read it yourself, I just showed you on the website, varietal-literature.ca. You click on the stories in the top. You can find all the 4 parts there and read it for yourself. Obviously, different experiences. Thank you to everybody who dropped by. If you feel the need to support your local writer, you can buy me a coffee on the website under the picture at the bottom of the story. But for the most part, I'm actually just very thankful for everybody who turned up to listen to me blab about my little tales. And I don't know why they meant so much to me, but they certainly did. And I hope they meant something to you as well, because, you know, that's why art gets published. I hope that this month will be a fun month for people. I hope that you guys will come back and check out some of the other stuff we're doing. I'm trying to do some new and different stuff, especially before I, you know, have less time, which is something that may happen soon. So trying to get as much out so that everybody can have fun with our very small but very dedicated little community here. Big Drew says, I've written some short stories and can vouch for that. The story is a journey and it happens organically while the author is writing. Yeah, even if you have structures, so much of it just organically occurs. It's very rarely set in stone from the beginning, and it's not usually helped by that, if I'm being honest. A little bit of structure is good, but if you're like, it has to end this way, it just feels forced. My songs, for example, usually start as a title or concept that I ponder for some time before proceeding. Ditto. I'm a thinker. Not every writer is that way. But I'll spend a lot of time thinking about something. And then when I feel, I don't know, it's hard to explain. You kind of feel that hook. You feel the Velcro on the idea and you latch on it all of a sudden. You're like, now's the time to do it. Sometimes you just have to sit down and do it, though. To take the Chuck Close quote, inspiration is for amateurs. The rest of us just show up and get to work and believe in the process will give us ideas. I'm sort of paraphrasing the second part there. GS says, thank you, Rory. It was a very moving and thought-provoking story. Well, thank you so much for everybody who dropped by. We'll be back next week with our usual silliness on our varietal show on Thursday night and, of course, Tuesday nights at 6:30, same time. We read fairy tales, and I tell you, I love a good fairy tale, and if you've not listened to a lot, I think you would too. Thank you so much for coming by. I've been Rory, and don't miss your train.